It's Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance on the Central Coast today, and we are joined by Justin Fareed. He is a candidate for the United States Congress, a seat on the Central Coast. It's the 24th Congressional District, currently held by Lois Capps, who is not running for re-election. I must ask, sir, why are you, Justin Fareed, running for Congress?
I appreciate you having me on the show.
Of course.
A few years ago, I worked for a senior member of Congress on a wide variety of different issues from foreign policy. His name was Ed Whitfield. He was the chairman of the Energy and Power Subcommittee for Energy and Commerce.
Got it. Okay.
And it was, I was really thrown in the deep end. It was sink or swim, and I had a wide variety of issues to work on, from foreign policy to small business, agriculture, commerce, manufacturing, and trade, which is a big part of my background. Many of those things. But it was my job to work and evaluate policy, and then to bring a consensus among people who are affected by it and move it between the House and the Senate.
Wow.
But it was really there that I saw all that's wrong with Congress today.
What's wrong with Congress?
You have so many political insiders that are more concerned about their next election than they are the policies that affect the rest of us and the future of this country. You see how it affects the nearsightedness with so many policies. You see all the empty rhetoric with very little action. It's just as bad as many people think.
Let me explain where I come from as a journalist and what I see. So I have the good fortune of interviewing folks in Sacramento and interviewing folks in Washington, D.C. And when I go to Sacramento, I may walk into a restaurant and I'll see Democrats and Republicans, elected officials, they're speaking to each other, they're getting along, they're having a great time. Policy differences, of course, but they seem to get along well. When I go to Washington, D.C., and I'm in Congress, literally inside the halls of Congress, Democrats and Republicans don't look at each other.
That's exactly right.
And I don't understand why. I mean, what's the problem, sir?
Again, I think it's more systemic. I think there's been a culture that's been developed there that is not only very partisan, but it's very linear at the same time.
Why? I mean, I think about, Ronald Reagan, the champion of the Republican Party, got along famously with Tip O'Neill, the champion of the Democratic Party.
Well, that's back when, once upon a time, the president was willing to work with Congress on policy. I don't think we've seen that in this administration, but you asked...
You could also argue that the Congress isn't willing to work with the president. I mean, look at the Supreme Court nomination right now. I mean, from the moment...
Well, Brad, it's a matter of how you want to look at it. Congress is elected by the people to serve the will of the people. They're supposed to create the policies and lay the directive of how we're governed, what the law is. It's the president's job to faithfully execute those laws. So, in many ways, it's the president's responsibility to work with Congress and not the other way around. You would like to have that coordination, but your initial question is, why isn't this working?
Right,
I think, again, it's deeply ingrained now over the last 20 years. It's been a political battle of who has the influence to move policy. Even when I was working back there, and this was just wrong, you had Nancy Pelosi, who wants to pass bills without reading it.
She was
minority leader.
She was minority leader. Okay.
And you had John Boehner on the other side, who essentially told the chairman of committees what conclusion that they had to come to before they even did the due diligence on the issue. Again, I think this is because the culture in politics with political insiders is more focused on election efforts than it is the policies that affect the rest of us.
So what does Justin Fareed do when he gets to Washington in January of 2017 to break that mold?
Yeah, and I appreciate that question, because that's a top priority. We have to get Congress working again for the American people first. That needs to be the priority.
But how do you do that, being one of 435?
Through reform. Well, one, you have to be able to build coalitions. You have to be able to build a consensus. So they have what they call caucuses back there, where you could literally say, okay, this is the problem that really is hurting us the most. Let's get people within the Republican Party or the Democratic Party who feel that this is a significant issue, that people in their district are concerned about it, and let's tackle this problem.
But do you think that you will be given the latitude to speak with, oh God, dare I say it, the Democrats?
I don't think anything is ever given. I think you have to go out and make it happen. I believe you need to have that tenacity, that drive, that energy to make it happen.
I mean, it seems to me that the current speaker, Paul Ryan, a Republican, is at least trying to change the tenor, the tone. I'm not there. I don't know. But, this presidential election is going to be crazy. And who knows what's going to happen. And so I just, again, ask you, How do you as one, I guess, look, we all have to strive, but how does you as one individual really change?
One individual has the ability to make it into two, and two could make it into three. That's how it happens. That's how, for example, in our campaign, I am not a political insider and therefore have had to go very strong grassroots, getting people within our community to have success within this campaign. And because so many people have jumped on board and have been helping out the campaign.
I want to talk to you about the campaign.
Sure.
Because,
well, let's get back to answering this question, because I don't think we're getting
hard to even remember.
Sure. The systemic reform that's necessary, Congress's main basic functions outside of supporting and representing their district first is budgeting of taxpayer dollars on the discretionary end, which is about 29% of all federal spending. You've got a current budget structure that is basically run an autopilot and isn't working.
Well, we don't have a budget. I mean, as we speak, there's fighting about whether we have a budget, when are we going to pass a budget.
So in the 42-year history that they've had this current structure, they've only passed a budget and allocated taxpayer dollars on time once.
So what do?
We reform the budget structure. Go to a 2-year structure.
Some states do that.
Exactly. A biennial budget that provides better oversight and management of taxpayer dollars, but puts a greater emphasis on how those taxpayer dollars are being spent, so that you have the ability to separate the bad from the good, to see what's working, what's not working, and to ensure that it's up to date with today's national priorities. That's where I believe you could have that debate, that discourse between people on either side of the aisle on whether this is the best thing for the American people moving forward.
What are our national priorities? And I ask you that also, I want you to consider, what are your potential constituents saying to you should be our national priorities? Sure.
I think a lot of people recognize and are feeling this today that Congress is not spending within its means. We're over $19 trillion in debt. That's reflected in the amount of taxes we pay, the fees, the regulatory costs. We need to get that in order, and we got to clean that up. I think we could have a much leaner, more efficient, and far more effective institution when you go through that budget reform. And secondly, you've got different departments and bureaucracies that are issuing out regulations and rules without any congressional authority. We need to be able to rein that in and be able to evaluate whether this is actually improving things for people or if it's having more of a detrimental impact. I meet with people all over the Central Coast, whether it's a startup entrepreneur, college students, to teachers, to fishermen in Morro Bay, to growers in Santa Maria. I meet with people from all different backgrounds. This is a very, very diverse district. I meet with men and women who are serving in our military. And I hear so many different things, but there is a general consensus that people would like to rein in burdensome regulations on small business, on farmers and growers, on fishermen.
Is that a federal issue or a state issue?
Well, it is when the departments and the agencies within the executive branch are issuing out regulations on this. I mean, it's kind of a sledgehammer, cookie cutter policy at the federal level. I believe that should be done more at a localized level. So when you ask that question, the reality is yes, it is a federal issue because it's been allowed by the members of Congress to become a federal level issue. So the real issue is, okay, how do we best improve this? Does that mean, every level of government, and a lot of people need to really understand this, you have a municipal level within your city, you have the county level, you have your state with the assembly and senate and your governor, and you got the federal government. Every level has different responsibilities and roles, and it's important to hold them accountable to what they're doing and understand which body is best served, if any at all.
And so what do you expect to do in your first, let's say, 6 months as a member of Congress?
I think the top priority first is to build consensus among reforming the budget structure so that we have an improved process. One thing you had mentioned, Speaker Paul Ryan, I had mentioned earlier in this segment how you had leadership of either party telling people what conclusion they had to come to. The idea with Congress is it's supposed to go from the bottom up, not the top down. And what Paul Ryan is doing, from my understanding, is trying to restore regular order, is what they call it.
You'll come back?
Absolutely.
His name is Justin Fareed, a candidate for the U.S. Congress. I'm Brad Pomerance, Charter Local Edition.